I've been attending Wiley United Methodist for 2.5 years, but only started to think about the structure of speech there since this semester while taking linguistics. Learning of Grice's maxims made me rethink how I evaluate whether speech or a conversation is meaningful and polite. And while researching, I have come to find that Grice's maxims are not the only or most effective way to evaluate spoken language. My research consisted of observing in person and watching DVDs of announcements from 3 different Sundays at Wiley with 2 male members and 1 female member speaking. The announcements typically last 4 to 5 minutes unless there are a lot of events occurring that day or week at the church. The breakdown of the announcements led to the realization that the maxims of quantity and quality are the most broken maxims while announcements progress. A violation of the maxim of quantity makes a contribution to the conversation that is more informative than necessary. A violation of the maxim of quality means that the speaker makes a false statement, breaking the rule that states, "Do not say what you believe to be false." And both of these types of violations were the most typical of announcements for all 3 speakers. So examples of violations of the maxim of quantity include redundancy, repetition, and excessive brevity or inclusion of superfluous information. The maxim of quality includes exaggeration or fantastical description. Also, I found that the female speaker violated the maxims more than the male speakers did, making 9 violations in her announcements, where the men typically made 3 to 4 violations. My ultimate finding was that even though multiple maxims were violated throughout the announcements, the conversation was still effective and meaningful. This made me reconsider whether Grice was the best standard for evaluating speech. My research led me to discover Leach's politeness principle. The main premise of Leach's politeness principle is that politeness varies from culture to culture. Whether something is polite or not ultimately depends on the culture of the group you are talking to or with. For one person, the violations in the announcements may be uncalled for and ineffective, but may have a different effect on another person. This contrasts with Grice's principles, because Grice never takes culture into account. His maxims are considered universal, and even though a culture may accept the humor that comes from violations as part of a meaningful conversation, it would not be considered polite, effective, or meaningful by Grice's standards. Overall, the culture of Wiley finds stronger relationships in the violations. The majority of the violations are humorous, or they add ethos and depth to the speaker's announcements. The male speakers were more likely to have humorous comments, such as joking about firing staff members or sending visitors requests for money. The female speaker's violations were actually stories added to her announcements that demonstrated her involvement in the church and the importance of the work of the church. For example, she tells a story of how she worked and felt fulfillment after working with the homeless of Abilene, while announcing about a meal the church would provide for the homeless on days the soup kitchen wasn't open. The violations allow the congregation to connect more with the speakers as they serve as representatives of the community. In my paper, I also break down the use of laughter in conversation and the role of humor in the play frame of language, which also adds humor and creates strong bonds and relationships between congregation members. In conclusion, my research ultimately pointed me toward a new way of evaluating conversation. It led me to believe that Grice's maxims and the cooperative principle may be too restricted for Wiley United Methodist Church's culture. With research, I found that Wiley United Methodist Church might better follow Leach's politeness principle rather than Grice's principle and maxims.